At least 6 top prosecutors in Minnesota are resigning in protest of how the Trump administration is handling last week's ICE-involved shooting in which an ICE agent killed 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good. This includes Joe Thompson, who served as acting U.S. attorney in Minnesota. A source says this follows days of pressure to focus the DOJ investigation not on the actions of the ICE agent who shot and killed Renee Good, but to focus the investigation on Good and others around her. The New York Times reporting this includes Good's widow. And indeed, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche today released a statement saying that the Justice Department does not believe there's evidence to back a criminal investigation into the ICE officer. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called the resignations a huge loss, writing on X, quote, "It's also the latest sign that Trump is pushing nonpartisan career professionals out of the Justice Department, replacing them with his stance," unquote. Thompson, by the way, the acting U.S. attorney, previously led the office's effort to tackle social services fraud in the state. That's an issue that's high on the Trump administration's priority list. We're learning other resignations are also possible as prosecutors weigh how to respond to this pressure from their superiors in Washington, D.C. At the same time, protests in Minneapolis continue to escalate. Today, law enforcement agents fired pepper balls as crowds blew whistles and shouted, "ICE out now." CNN crews on the scene say agents surged into the area with at least 15 different large SUVs. As agents returned to their vehicles, flashbangs were also fired at the crowd of protesters. Some protesters seen throwing snowballs at agents. This is, of course, Minnesota in January. Around 1,000 more U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents are expected to deploy to Minneapolis. That's on top of 2,000 federal agents deployed to the area already. In a long Truth Social post earlier today, President Trump defended ICE agents, writing, quote, "Fear not, great people of Minnesota, the day of reckoning and retribution is coming," unquote. Let's get right to CNN's Ryan Young, who's on the ground in Minneapolis. And Ryan, you and your crew were caught in the middle of some of the unrest this afternoon. Tell us about it.
Yeah, we were caught right in the middle of that, Jake. But right before I tell you about that, I want to show you this scene right here. This is the people who are left outside the federal building. These folks are still angry and energized. They've been yelling at the federal cars that go by. They've been trying to take video of the people inside those cars. But let us show you this video from earlier today. This is what we saw. We saw the whistles. We heard people screaming. When we ran that direction, we saw this ICE action happening. We saw flashbangs, and they used irritant to try to disperse this crowd. It happened so suddenly. Hundreds of agents in this crowd trying to wrestle certain people out of their cars. At some point, we saw at least 3 people being detained. But at the same time, these federal agents were spraying themselves with that irritant. So we saw several agents getting sprayed with that irritant, trying to react to it, as these protesters, some using their bodies to try to stop them from making the arrest. We talked about the snowballs. They definitely used that to try to stop them. And there were people who physically tried to jump on some of the cars that the agents were using to try to get away from that neighborhood. After that, though, this area that was near where that shooting happened with Renee Good, it went back to being peaceful, but it was energized with more people coming and surging into the neighborhood. This is, though, the federal building where a lot of people feel those agents are. You can see them standing, some in the street, some trying to block traffic. And when they do see people they believe are ICE agents, they sometimes physically try to step into the street to stop them as well. But today's action, I can tell you, Jake, was the most energized and physically aggressive that we've seen from both sides, with the hundreds of agents surging into a neighborhood today, people running in the alleys to try to get away from the situation. So many questions about what happens next. Let's not forget, more federal agents in the area now than police officers on the street.
All right, Ryan Young, thanks so much. Let's discuss all of this with CNN's Priscilla Alvarez, who covers immigration issues expertly for us, and CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig. Elie, let me start with you. At least 6 top prosecutors resigning in Minnesota. The New York Times reports it's because they felt they were pressured to investigate the widow of Renee Nicole Good, the woman that was shot and killed by the ICE officer last week. What's your take on that?
Jake, if that proves out, it's an utter outrage. If the Department of Justice has chosen to focus their investigation not on the actions of the officer, not on the actions of Renee Good at the scene of the fatal shooting, but rather on the widow of the deceased, that is indefensible. First of all, whatever the widow of Renee Good may have done, what her associations may have been, is completely and totally irrelevant to the question of whether this was a justified legal self-defense shooting by the ICE officer. Second of all, prosecutors get leads on cases from all different places. Sometimes a cooperator or an informant will give you a lead. Sometimes you'll read a story in the newspaper. But to get a lead based on a person who was fatally shot and say, now let's look at that person's widow to see if they broke the law, it's utterly indefensible. And I think it lends context to why these prosecutors chose to resign.
Well, the White House press secretary referred to the deceased, Renee Good, as a, quote, deranged lunatic. So it's not as though empathy is in excess supply over at the White House. Priscilla, what do you know about what's happening behind the scenes at the Department of Homeland Security?
Yeah, Jake, look, there's mixed emotions at the Department of Homeland Security among these agents. Some are frustrated with this operation, with this mission. Others support it. And I'm talking here about the 3,000 now agents who have deployed to Minneapolis from all over the country. The two agencies that I'm talking about here are Immigration and Customs Enforcement, involved in that shooting last week, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Now, I am told that they are doing targeted operations in Minneapolis, meaning that they know who they're going after. But these are two agencies who have had simmering feuds and tensions over the years. And if people are noticing that there's different tactics on the ground in Minneapolis, the reason is because each of these agencies tend to take a different approach in how they do immigration enforcement. For example, CBP, typically on the U.S.-Mexico border. So it creates this confusing situation and can lend itself to those feuds reigniting in this city at a time when there are thousands of officers there. But I do want to note, Jake, we should take a step back here, because what is remarkable about what was happening in Minneapolis and Minnesota is that this is the president's immigration vision centering in one place. Take it in totality. You have stripping federal funds, or the threat to do that. The threat to denaturalize the Somali nationals that are in Minnesota, flooding the zone with agents, sending more prosecutors to prosecute those U.S. citizens who are impeding on law enforcement. If you look at everything that the administration is doing, this is the playbook that they have wanted since the early days, and that they are now doing in Minneapolis, and what they want to continue doing in other blue cities.
Ellie, this is the latest instance of the Justice Department and the FBI continuing to hemorrhage experienced veterans and career prosecutors because of the way they are doing business. We remember when there were those mass resignations after that deal, that sketchy deal with Mayor Eric Adams was struck. All those prosecutors in New York just resigned because they didn't like what was being done. What does this mass resignation, these 6 prosecutors in Minnesota, what does that say to you?
Well, Jake, just for perspective, the entire U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota has about 70 prosecutors. So when the number 2 person and 6 total prosecutors resign, that's 10% of that office leaving in protest in one fell swoop. And broader perspective here, if you think of the loss of talent and experience that's happened at DOJ, people who've been fired or pushed out over the last year. You mentioned the Eric Adams case. Several experienced prosecutors left then. Prosecutors were forced out over their refusal to indict Jim Comey and Letitia James in the Eastern District of Virginia. You had prosecutors, anyone who touched the Jack Smith prosecution was fired. Anyone, FBI agent or U.S. attorney who worked on a January 6th prosecution has been pushed out. So we're talking about dozens upon dozens of prosecutors, hundreds of experienced FBI agents, and DOJ is no different than any other organization, whether you're talking about a law firm, a bank, a media organization, a football team. If you lose that much talent all at once, it's going to show in the actual performance of that organization.
Yeah, and that organization is staffed and was tasked with keeping the American people safe. Priscilla Alvarez, Ellie Honig, thanks to both of you.